Hello, and welcome back to Heart Wisdom, Jack Kornfield's podcast, nestled so sweetly on the Be Here Now network. I'm Ganesh, honored to open the door to episode 271, Diffusing Triggers, Reframing Trauma, and Surviving Suffering, a video episode with Dr. Thomas Hübl. This is from Dr. Thomas's Spiritual Healing Journey Summit, and we thank him and the rest of his team for allowing us to use this wonderful footage of him interviewing Jack. And in listening to this conversation, what it ends up turning into is a very profound toolkit for our modern age. They speak to very prescient hot topics like triggers, these stimuli, unique stimuli for each of us that incite something within our nervous system that just takes over our volition, and we generally jump right into fight, flight, or freeze. This is something that I have been dealing with immensely lately, and I'm sure so many others have as well, as our anxiety load consistently seems to be at an overload at points. So Jack and Dr. Hübl here offer a guide to help diffuse this and allow us to come back into a space of mindful, loving awareness. And speaking of mindful, loving awareness, there is a great section in this where Jack talks about his friend and fellow teacher, Ram Dass, and the notion of central casting, that each of us is playing our individual human role oh so perfectly, and that whether we like it or not, we are playing roles for every single person we meet. I'm not sure if you've ever gone up to someone and they have a completely different view of you than you have of yourself, or maybe your friends have of you, and you can't seem to shake that. And you're just like, oh, I guess I am this role for this person. Central casting, Ram Dass would say, and Jack would say in this, has cast you in that role for them. That is your karmic duty to play out in whatever way you so choose. So that's one side of identity. That's your social security number, as Jack says in this, that we must remember our social security number. And the other side of this identity coin is the remembering of our true divine nature, our boundless Buddha nature. And it is these two levels which Jack asks us to be able to live on at the same time. We cannot throw away our humanity for the oneness, and we cannot only live from our personalities and our separation. We see where that can lead. So in this podcast, this beautiful podcast where Jack is able to reframe trauma and help us past our nervous system triggers, there is a doorway that Jack speaks of that he calls the doorway to transformation, where when we walk through, we are able to dissolve the cosmos into love, and not in spite of our humanity, but through and in our humanity. This is what Jack calls the wisdom of insecurity. This has been coming up in so many of our podcasts lately, that it's okay to feel insecure. It's part of our human law, and it's not about waiting to not feel insecure and then taking our action. It's feeling insecure and loving anyway. At my local skate park, there's a sign on the wall, and it says, "Do it scared." So I invite you as homework this week to, if you are insecure about something or scared, to not have that be the thing that shies you away from it. Do it scared. If you're insecure, love anyway. And this is how we move forward. And as Jack says, open the door to transformation. I really hope you enjoy this episode. The only bit of housekeeping I have is to join Jack's Year of Awakening course. It is an amazing journey that will be going on all of 2025. There will be meetups with Jack online, live Q&A sessions, some movie nights, just a really good opportunity to stay connected with Sangha throughout the year. Otherwise, I really hope you enjoy this wonderful video episode with Dr. Thomas Hübl and Jack Kornfield. This is Heart Wisdom 271, Diffusing Triggers, Reframing Trauma, and Surviving Suffering. May you be happy, may you be healthy, may you help others through the authenticity of your being, and may your heart be smiling. Namaste.
All right, so I do have a few things. Spiritual injury. One of the things about it is that people get into spiritual communities and we get terribly idealistic. Oh, these are the wise ones. Well, it turns out some of them are, but it turns out most of them are human, like everybody else. And I remember early on when I was studying with my wonderful, great teacher, Ajahn Chah, who was kind of the wisest person I ever met, living in his forest monastery. Then I went to this Burmese monastery, and the meditation master was a really skilled teacher at inner states. Here's how you expand your consciousness. Here's how you fill it with light. Here's how you see the entire world dissolving and recreating itself, all these insights and, dissolving the separateness and so forth. He was also a jerk. He messed with the nuns, what he wasn't supposed to do. He threw rocks at the dogs that would come into his beautiful little garden. He shouted at people. And I went, how can I learn from this guy? But then I go and talk to him about my inner life. And he had jewels. Try this, do that. And I had to realize, he can keep his part and I'll take the part that's good. But we aren't taught that discernment. And so we go in blindly and think, it's great Zen, it's a great Hindu teacher, it's a great Jewish mystic, whatever tradition, or indigenous elder, it doesn't matter. Half of them mess up. And then we're at the effect of that. And the effect is bigger depending on how much blind faith we have. So that when I go to communities, and I've been in many that have had the meltdown of what Trudy and I, my beloved, our shorthand is the usual. And you can fill in the blank. Generally, it's around sex, but it's also money and power or whatever. And it's more the men, but not exclusively. Women can be, abusive leaders too. But anyway, those communities take a really long time to heal. Kind of almost more than other kinds of injuries, because it's a soul injury. It's an injury to a very deep place in us that we thought was going to blossom. And then the beliefs come crashing down. And you put so much energy into it, and you cared so much. And that is the measure of how much the grief at the end is. And it takes a very long time off. To be able to trust again, to go back. It's disillusionment is part of the spiritual path, baby. Mm-hmm. It is. You have to see with the eyes of the Buddha, to see the truth of suffering and greed and hatred, and also see that it's not the end of the story, that's not who you are. Live in joy even amidst it. Live in a free heart. But you need to come to terms with it. Also, two more things, and they raise questions for you, Thomas, and for us. One really has to do with identification, because in a way, the whole spiritual journey is stepping out of the false separate self. Or we'll just call it the separate self. Believe it's false to believe that it's totally separate. We do have unique selves, but they're woven with everything else. So how do we hold this? Ram Dass, when he came back from India to begin teaching in the West with that big bestseller, Be Here Now, and he came back from his guru, and he had a white robe and beard and beads, and he really was, playing the Hindu guru card for a while. He was teaching in New York, big crowd of people, and in the front row, a woman was sitting, And he's going on about, the Bhagavad Gita, or going on about Rama and Krishna and, the Hindu mythology and the ways you can use that to learn to love. She raised her hand. She said, Ramdas, aren't you Jewish? Like, what's with all this Hindu stuff? Come on. And Ramdas said, yeah, I am Jewish, as I am. I was bar mitzvahed. Ramdas was Jewish. And she said, so what about it? And he said, I love Jewish spirituality, especially the tales of the Hasidim, because they're just, the great Hasid masters are like those great Zen masters. Those stories are amazing. And the Kabbalah, which has these maps of consciousness, it's really beautiful in the Jewish tradition of caring for one another, tikkun olam. He paused for a little bit, and then he looked back and he said, but remember, I'm only Jewish on my parents' side. And it was a very witty comment, which he was, but it was also brilliant and deep. When you talk about your ancestors, or your ancestors are the earthworms and the fishes, they're part of your ancestry. And then I remember people questioning Malidoma. I have some bad ancestors. What do I do about that going back? He said, oh, you skipped those ones. It was very African pragmatic spirituality. You just skip over those.
Right.
But so I'm really raising the question of identity, that spiritual practice is to be able to expand your identity without diminishing the individual, to remember your true divine nature, and also remember, your social security number, that you have a particular role. Central casting has placed you in this role at this time, and to not denigrate either side, but to feel the connection with all, and then let it empower the responsibility or the ability to respond in this particular incarnation you have. And when you understand it that way, then you can see you have all these identities. You're a parent, or you're a son, or you're a daughter, or you're a Catholic, or a Muslim, or a native, or you're a teacher or a student, or you're a leader or a follower. The thing is, you're all of these. You're a brother or sister, and you switch hats with your identity, but then you believe them, instead of realizing that who you are is awareness itself that's taken form in this way. The awareness is completely woven. It's the dream of consciousness. So then, all right, so most of spirituality is recognize how to step out of what's called the body of fear, the small sense of self. Not that you destroy or get rid of the self, but you see that it's limited. And when you identify in that limited way, there's fear. When you don't, fear arises, but it doesn't have much to do with who you are. But then here's the question for you. I've kind of gotten tired of the word trauma and the way it's being bandied about. It's become, like everybody has trauma. Now we have to teach trauma-centered spiritual practice, and we have to look for trauma and whatever. It's been a great thing to uplift it, because when I trained as a therapist, 50 years ago, it was not understood. And we didn't have Peter Levine and Bessel van der Kolk and you and others saying, here's how it shows up, and here's how we deal with it. And I began early on bringing in Western therapeutic skills for trauma and things for spiritual practice, because it kept coming up. And you can't do the bypass, or you can do it, but then as soon as you come out, you're the same old wreck that you were before you went in. You had a beautiful kind of enlightened meditation. And then how do you deal with people that you share your house with, or in your neighborhood, or in your culture? So, but it's gone to where it's become a really big focus. And I've gotten, what's the right word? I was going to say somehow tired of, or sort of needing to step away from that trauma word a lot, because it has in our culture a medical meaning. And this is the problem. Oh, I have trauma. There's something wrong with me. We now have trauma therapy. And if I get the right EMDR, SE, blah, 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 whatever, I can heal myself from my medical trauma and I'll be a better person. And the world will be better. And everybody's coming in with their trauma and they need to heal. It's suffering. It's the Buddhist First Noble Truth. That's woven into life. You didn't do something wrong. It doesn't have to be healed. I mean, trauma can be healed. There are things to do. But suffering doesn't get healed. There's praise and blame and gain and loss and birth and death and health and illness. Anybody not have that? You can get your money back. Send it to Thomas. He'll send it back. This is human incarnation. And so then the spiritual question sort of divides with a little bit more discernment, I would say. If you have significant trauma that's still impacting your ability to be present in a kind and loving way to yourself and others, you need to lift that up and bring it into the light of awareness, and usually need somebody to help you with it. And it can be horrible parents, it can be surgery and accidents that threw you into the hospital for a really long time and stuff. It can be work, all the big traumas. They don't always they traumatize you in a way, but they don't always have to be fixed. They have to be fixed, and you wrote about it, if they have to be attended to, if they're still running your life in part. That's the call. Okay, let's deal with it like those kids with the stones. Let's tell the story. Let's have someone witness it. Let's do some healing things, so whatever, so we can shift our identity from being triggered, because the nervous system carries that in the body. That's vessels, the body keeps the score. But that's only one part. Okay, you dealt with your trauma some, or you don't, whatever. The rest of it is just suffering. And it's not medical. And you didn't do something wrong. And it doesn't have to be healed. It's how do you live with well-being in a world that has greed and hatred and love and beauty, and you can't separate them all, that they're woven together. Then this speaks to the true spiritual path, which is, yes, it has those healing parts of attention and compassion, but how do you find a freedom of heart and spirit beyond that limited identity, feel the sacredness, and then actually be the sacredness and the play? So that's the question, and a little bit of a kind of reframe, especially since you're in the trauma industry, right? You're one of the industry spokespeople.
Yes, and I think what you just said, and you said something before earlier that I want to come back, that I was interested in. You said something about, like, when there was somebody sitting in the psychoanalysis chair, and it was very much about looking at the mother and the father, and then you said, yeah, but they felt like that because they were breathing toxins and do you want to speak a little bit to how we practice, or what's the practice to be in this world and bring awareness and change, and also be with the parts of life that are toxic, that are whatever, racist, that are hurting our environmental part, so our environment and the environmental world. So how does what you just said, like, we are living in a world of suffering, and how does our practice engage in the society in a way that is harmful or is hurting? How do you, and I know you do also a lot of work on that, the combination between our inner practice and change and our outer impact, let's say. Do you want to speak a bit to that?
So first, I guess it's Reinhold Niebuhr. What is that little beautiful aphorism that they use so often in AA? Lord, give me the whatever to change the things I can, to accept the things I can't change, and the wisdom to know the difference, right? I forget the first, the grace or something like that. So in that one long sentence, that answers your question, right? And if you want to see suffering, you just go to an AA meeting or an NA meeting or something like that, and you see people struggling, in this case, with the brokenness of their own lives and trauma and things that they've experienced and caused, but also that they're sensing that there's another way of being, whether it's AA or there's lots of other things. And that way requires community. It requires a kind of courage to see the suffering and our participation in it, and to step back from it. That very first thing I read from the Buddha, to live in joy even amidst where there's hatred or there's fear or confusion. And that's why people do practice. You need both community, and when you do a practice like a compassion or a loving kindness meditation, and it's called practice because you do it over and over until you really inhabit it. It's there in you. It's your nature, but it's been kind of covered over. And metta, the spiritual technology of it is really quite brilliant as a practice, loving kindness. First, you start wherever it's easy. We're so weird, like, where's the toughest place for me to love? You don't have to start with Idi Amin and Hitler and, Joseph Stalin or whatever. Start where it's easy. The place that's the easiest, a child you care about, a lover, maybe your dog, whatever kind of softens your heart, and then bring a few more in and expand that and practice loving kindness. After you've gotten in that place, then you expand it to include family and friends, community around. Then you go to what they often call unnoticed people. Your postman or the person at this shop where you walk down to, or the whatever. And it's a really amazing thing because you can do the practice of loving kindness. May you safe and well and sort of hold them in love. May you be protected and filled with kindness. And then you do it and you pick individuals. I remember, doing this for somebody. I was doing a retreat of loving kindness meditation. And after the retreat, I was walking somehow in the neighborhood and I saw that person and I just melted. I go, oh my God, the forgotten one, the neutral, the person that I love you, and it's because I practiced it. And then you expand to other countries or cultures or people. And eventually the instruction is to pick both difficult and then extremely difficult people. And I found in my metta, or in this practice, that I can wish well to anybody. That I can say, if I change the inner intention, I can picture Vladimir Putin and say, may you be free from hatred. May you be free from pain. May you be free from fear. And really mean it, And those are the same words I might say to a friend as well. But it's the doorway to transformation of ourselves, and then gradually to all other beings, because then you expand to the non-human beings in all the directions. And pretty soon if you do the whole deal, you kind of dissolve the cosmos into love. So there are practices to do, is sort of what you're saying. First, you deal with what trauma, if it really encumbers your life, and you get somebody to help you, because you can't do it alone. This is really important. Very rarely. You need it. It needs to be witnessed and spoken and heard and mirrored. It needs a ritual too, often, just a ritual coming together. But I was thinking about this woman I was working with on a long retreat. and she had the trauma of omission. They're the traumas of commission. Somebody beat you, somebody threw you out of the car door, what. The omission was like the dead zone of the family, where you were unseen and uncared for, and you don't exist in that way. And she was talking about that her mother always bought non-fat milk, right? Because she was trying to stay thin while her mother was, while she drank and smoked her cigarettes and whatever. And she said for her as a child, it was like a symbol of not getting. So I went to town and I bought a bottle of unpasteurized milk with a big cream hovering in the top. And I brought it back. And the next day she came in for her meditation report. And I said, I have something for you that I want you to drink. And I gave her this glass bottle with the cream on the top and this huge smile on her face, because not only was the suffering that she'd lived through seen, but that there was a response that says, it doesn't have to be this way in some fashion. I don't know what cut me off on this, but I was saying there are two things. You deal with the trauma as you can, and then you live with suffering. And the point then is, once you can live with suffering, and you expand your circle of compassion, as Einstein said, then a child falls down, you help them up. Somebody's hungry, you give them food, not because you're such a special person, but you happen to have a plate full of food and they don't have any on their plate. And it's there in every child. How many of us know that child wants to take a candy out of their mouth and put it in your mouth, right? I mean, and candy that's like gold, it's diamonds, it's platinum for a child. It's like the best. Here, slimy as it is, taste this too. It is who we are from the beginning, that child of the spirit that loves. And so we're reawakening to it in some fashion. And maybe in another language, all of spiritual practice is just about love, because it is. And so then we do our practice, whatever it is, and it can be chanting and qigong and whatever. But if you do it right, honorably, you'll also go through difficulties. You'll get bored of your chanting, or you'll start to do your shopping list while you're chanting, some form of the holy name, or, and you learn to forgive yourself and carry on. And pretty soon you get steadier with it. You realize, okay, I'm just human. I have my foibles, but I can turn my heart and attention to beauty, to love, with all the suffering. And then you find your job isn't to fix the world. I mean, there you are in Israel, Gaza, Palestine, all that kind of suffering. And I've seen it, some of it firsthand in there, and just feel the tremendous pain of these cycles of trauma and violence happening. It's not your job to stop it or to fix it. It's your job to reach out your hand and mend the part that you can touch. And we each have to get quiet and say, what part can I heal? What am I called to do? And this is sort of the bodhisattva dimension of spiritual practice. And one takes a bodhisattva vow in some form or other, which is really a vow to say, I'll devote my life to alleviating the suffering of myself and others, to reducing harm in the world so that it can flourish. That's the task. The bodhi means awakened. Sattva means being a being who fosters the awakening of the heart wherever they go, whatever way they can. And you find your particular way. Some it's an activist, some it might be teaching contemplative practice, but teaching it from the place of interconnection and responsibility. Yeah, let me pause for a second. You might have something more to ask as well. The thing is that we know this. Do you know Juan Ramon Jimenez's poem, Yo no soy yo? I am not I, he writes. I'm this one walking beside me whom I do not see, whom at times I manage to visit, and whom at other times I forget. The one who remains silent when I talk. The one who forgives sweet when I hate. The one who takes a walk when I'm indoors. The one who will remain standing when I die. And he's saying to you, you know this. You already understand. It was born into you because it's who you are. And your spiritual practice isn't to make you some kind of saintly person. Spare your friends and family. It's really to remember love, to remember, the first thing you do when a baby comes out, you love it. And the last thing, somebody's dying, you hold their hand. You can't do anything for them. Sell my portfolio. I'm sorry, it's too late. You can hold their hand in love and say, it's okay, it's natural. Why not in between? And so that poem says, you know this, and you can live through this. And then we need each other. We need to remind each other, and we need practices. Not because you're trying to become some great saint, but they're really practices of remembering, of bringing back all the members. It's also true that as you look, the kind of lens you have, Thomas, and I've seen it from early on too. I remember teaching retreats in Germany 40 or more years ago, 45 years ago. So it was a lot closer to World War II then. It was in the 1970s. And people would come and they would sit, and I was this young teacher, and I got people would come. And I was shocked to see how much of the Second World War came into the silence of that room. People would come talk to me. My father was a Sonderkommandant, and my family was in the SS, and my this and that, and or we were run out of town, and there was so much suffering. You worked with it that was carried the minute they sat down, and it was familial, but it was cultural, it was collective, and it was still in the psyche. It's not there in quite the same way anymore. It's 45, 50 years later. They have new suffering now. What do we do with all the Turkish people and all the who are coming, and how do we deal with the fact that we live in Europe and we're connected with all this, and it's frightening, and we have other kinds of suffering. But it starts there, and then you acknowledge it and you work with it in whatever way you can because it's been buried, and then you go, okay, who I'm larger than this, as Whitman said. I am large, I contain multitudes, and there's something so much bigger that happens when you're able to sit in loving awareness and say, yeah, this is part of the place I was born. This is my particular karma right now. Doesn't say that much about who I really am, but it's a task. I got born into this one. Let's see what I do with it. I also had to learn about trauma in other ways because I had a lot of family suffering. My father was quite violent. He was a brilliant scientist, but he was also paranoid and violent. My mother would hide bottles behind the curtains in the house so she could pick them up to defend herself if he tried to beat her or throw her down the stairs, which was hard to witness as a 4 or 5 year old boy. But also, he was terrified, all of us, so his sons as well. And when I went to the monastery, I was the peacemaker in the family. I thought, I'm going to learn how to be even more peaceful, and it was a very peaceful place. And I started to get irritated and annoyed. Mm-hmm. And the monk who lived in the forest hut not far away was doing this and that. And then I started to get angry, and I went to my teacher. And I said, I'm getting angry. And he looked at me, he smiled, he said, great. He said, yeah, you have to learn about that. That's an energy of our life. Go back to your little hut. It has a tin roof and one window. It's the hot season. Close the window and the door. Put on all your robes. If you're going to be angry, do it right and sit in the fire. Do that this week or this month, until you're familiar with it. And what happened was that unconsciously, I said, I'm not going to be like my father. I'm not going to be a violent, angry person. So I'm peaceful. I'm not angry. But it was all in there, all that rage and everything. It all came out. And it was just there waiting for a little quiet. But it would have been boring to say that was what I did in the monastery. I did it. I did that. We do stuff. But it's not really about the trauma. The trauma is sort of the gateway, if you will, to learn some things. Okay, I'm going to stop.
That's amazing, Jack. I love so much to listen to you. I really appreciate a lot all the wisdom that comes through you when you speak, and combined with all your life experience, it's beautiful. So,
well, James Baldwin said at one point, I can't find the quote right now, that I imagine the main reason that people cling to their hate and prejudice so stubbornly is because they sense that once hate is gone, they'll be forced to deal with their own pain. And here he kind of summed up some of the things you're trying to point us to in spiritual healing and so forth, that if we can't be with the measure of tears that's given, if we can't bear our own individual and our collective suffering, whatever your tribe or community or people you came from, then we project it out. It's the immigrants, it's the Chinese, it's the Black people, it's the gays, it's anything to not feel right now in North America, the huge changes economically. We're going to lose our jobs. White people are going to not be the majority anymore. Where are our spiritual values? All those things. But instead of turning toward our own life, because we can't bear the insecurity of it. This is called the wisdom of insecurity, to learn that it's okay to feel insecure. That's part of our human lot, and to love anyway.